Hey guys, Brent Hull Build Show, talking today about floors, all about the history of floors, more than you wanted to know, and a special parquet floor that we built for this wonderful house, hand pegged. It was awesome. Come join me. Okay, so floors, right? Wood floors in particular, right? They are always something we talk about with clients. So we've got our showroom here and we've got samples of floors that we're showing them. Now, remember, a lot of stuff we're building is period revival things, English and French and colonial revivals. So we're using historic woods and using special woods to convey a story, right? If you go back into those historic houses and look at the floors, one of the more charming features, a wide plank pine floor, or some of these other details, they're really quite beautiful. And so they can be a very important architectural element that can really sell the job. So we end up showing them a lot of samples. Now, some of these samples are pretty nice, okay? So this is a wide plank floor, okay? Now, why would you just choose a wide plank floor? Well, pre-industrialization, most wood floors were wide plank, okay? So you have after 1870, 1880, floors getting into the 3.5 inch and 2.5 inch widths. So when you walk into a house, you can immediately know how old it is based on the floors. This is a 1921 warehouse. We've got maple strip floors, right? And we've patched it with oak, and there's other places we've patched it with pine because this is a warehouse, this is where we're manufacturing. So if you go pre-industrial, right? If we're trying to build a house that looks like it's from the 1820s, we're going to have a wider plank floor. And depending on where it is in the country, we will have either oak or pine or some other material like that. Now, remember that when the Industrial Revolution starts, one of the things that's so great is that floors could now be tongue and grooved, right? That was a huge time saver because laying floors in an historic building, when you had joists that were running up and down, each one had to be fit. Sometimes they were doweled together. The other thing you'll notice on this is that this is an engineered board, okay? So we have plywood at the bottom, okay? And then we have a veneer, probably a 1/4 inch veneer of oak. What's happened is when we first started using wide plank floors, because of the humidity or something else, those floors had a tendency to cup, had a tendency to move. When you're getting into these wide plank things, and sometimes these wide planks can be, you know, this is 12 inches wide. And the challenge of doing this is keeping this board flat. So when the fact that it's engineered with a piece of plywood means that it's going to last longer. The other thing is that the way this engineering works is sometimes I hear people say, well, it won't last as long as the original stuff. Well, it does, because the wood goes down almost to the tongue. What that means is that you're going to sand and finish this thing 3, 4, 5, 6 times, right, before you get down to the tongue where it takes too long. So it will last just as long as the other, but it stays stable and it stays flat, which is a huge deal. The other thing about floors is that you can see that this one is a salvaged piece of oak, right? And you can see this one actually has worm holes and worm knots in it, right? Flooring then becomes kind of this dial that, you know, how rustic do we want to make it? This a cottage? Well, we would choose something like this with the board, has the checks in the wood, has worm holes, a lot of knots, right? It's going to convey that cottage feel. If we have something that's very nice and we want it to be, you know, much more refined, we take a piece like this and there's barely any character defects in it. It's a much cleaner, wider piece of wood. I'm going to show you this floor that we did for this house where we did this wonderful library, and we decided this was kind of a French eclectic, kind of modern designed house where we had 2 rooms that were supposed to be the nicest room, and we decided to make a parquet floor. Now, the French parquet floor was something that was handmade and hand constructed and put together with dowels and pegs, mortise and tenon, right? They were many pieces of art. And so when we look at these floors here in a second, I'm going to show you there's a number of different ways that have a strong historic precedent, but we ended up measuring the room that was like 18 by 20, and we broke it up. We managed where the cabinets were going and everything else, and we actually designed the size of the parquet so that we had these big sheets that were 4 by 4 or 4 by 5, depending on how we were going to get them. And we had another room, a dining room, which was 20 by 25, and we had much bigger pieces of parquet. So I'm going to show you those floors. We're going to talk about the hand joinery and the pegging that goes into them, and some very traditional floors. Okay guys, so I used a book to help me out on this thing. It's The Arts and Techniques of Parquetry, which is a French book. So a lot of pretty pictures, but I can't read everything. Good thing there's Google Translate. I've got two samples here that we made for a client, okay? They are the herringbone pattern, a sawtooth herringbone, and then the parquet. Now, these are very traditional French floors. The parquet floor, and realize that parquetry and laying floors was a unionized, gilded group of artisans who built floors and did things. Now, a parquetry floor would be something that was made for a much nicer house, right? Because it's more custom, more handmade. So this is the era of the 17th and 18th century in France as floors became more elaborate. It's only natural that the French did crazy things with their floors, right? Because they did everything over the top. Everything was incredible there. So realize too that these are very closely tied with ceilings, right? The spacing between these beams and how these would have been put together was very important because it supported the floor, right? And so these joints here, or this comes together, or this comes together, would have had to have been supported by a beam. What that means is that there is a spacing and a scale that goes along with these floors that's very important. It can't get too big. It's got to still reflect that kind of human scale. Now we got this parquet floor. Now, traditionally there was 3 or 4 different styles. There was the Versailles pattern, the Chantilly pattern. And so we ended up doing more of a Chantilly pattern where we kind of weave these things together. And you'll notice that you have the long piece here, a long piece here, and then these things are all pegged. Now, we used a square peg, a faceted peg, so it doesn't come loose. These aren't round dowels. They have to be square. And so you'll see them on the outside here. You'll see them on the inside as this gets tied together. So each piece would have been made and cut, tongue and grooved, right? So it all fit together, so it all locks together. And then this outside piece clamped in and it mortise and tenon together. So you have a mortise and tenon joint there and at each corner, and it's hand pegged, right? So it is a real custom made piece of flooring. Now we had for that, at that library, I think we had 8 or 10 of these. My guys are at the table, they're cutting these different pieces, they're making up a number of, and they're tonguing and grooving them and putting them back together. So it's a wonderful floor, right? There is filled with tradition, filled with historic precedent. So we were able to really give this client something very special by making these parquet floors. You can as well make them. Now what you'll want to do is you'll have to lay out the whole room, right? You'll probably put a border around the room so that you get a square pattern that works. They're fun to put together. Floors are a great character piece, right? You walk across them all the time, you notice them, you see when the pattern changes and all these different things. I always walk into a house, look at the floors and go, oh, that's from this period or that's from this period, based on its size, its width, the grain pattern. All those things are really important. Now, we'll often get a comment about finish, okay? How do you handle finish? Historically, wax was used, okay? Historically, these things would have been just waxed finish. Now, polyurethanes and those kind of finish are a post-industrial kind of finish, and so we have stopped using polyurethane for the most part and are using waterborne finishes now. But what we're doing is we're making sure that the sheen, okay, which is the reflectivity, and you'll notice that there's really not much sheen on these floors at all because currently our clients want this dulled wax finish. And so we're doing a 10 sheen, a 20 sheen. That's the amount of light it reflects. Nothing high gloss, okay? So none of our clients want high gloss, and so they want something that looks worn currently, at least over the houses that we're building. So we are not waxing these floors, okay? We are typically putting a stain, letting the client choose that. There's not a lot of historic precedent for different stains. Some of them are naturally finished, naturally colored. The color of these floors is actually a fumed oak, okay? Now fuming is when you expose oak. It's only oak because there's tannins in oak. Tannin acid in oak reacts to ammonia, so a very strong ammonia, when it's exposed to this wood, turns brown, this kind of chocolate brown color. Now, depending on the amount of tannins in the wood, you'll see some don't take as much stain as others, but it's a very natural finish. Because there's no stain on it, means there's no pigment on it, okay? Because stain is just basically pigment on top of the wood. The grain shows through a lot better. So chemical dyes like this, where you're using ammonia to actually change the color, actually is a much better way to stain and finish the floor. Now, to do an ammonia finish, you actually have to build a chamber and expose the wood for a day, maybe 2 days inside this enclosed chamber while you're fuming the wood. But the look of it is very historic, very natural. You know, they discovered fuming because they put old furniture in the barn, and the urine from the cows and the horses actually changed the color of the wood. And so they realized that ammonia was changing the color of the oak, and they started fuming. Gustav Stickley did it a lot in the arts and crafts period. Okay guys, so floors, right? They're really important, they matter. There's a great historic tradition. That industrial and pre-industrial and the sizing and the width of the floors really matter. Choosing your oak, right? Choosing your material and the wood that you're going to use is so important to the character and the story of the house. It matters. It's not something that you can send a client, hey, just go pick your floors. It's something you should pay close attention to. Great historic precedent, hand working, hand pegging, can really set your job apart. Be sure to follow me on Instagram and Facebook, Hull Millwork, Hull Homes. Sign up for the newsletter, and if you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. I'm Brent Hull. Thanks for watching.